What are the biggest areas of concerns for the Denver Broncos after their first preseason game, and what can they fix going into this week's matchup against the San Francisco 49ers? We dive deep into that and much more on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's happening, Broncos Country? Welcome into a brand new episode of Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much to everybody in Broncos Country for tuning in, making us your first listen of the day every single day. Also, shout out to all the everydayers out there who make us part of your daily routine every single day, all year long. Make sure you subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss out on a day's worth of Broncos news, content, coverage, analysis, and more. I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports. Joined alongside, as always, by my co-host, Sayre Bedinger. He's the site expert over there, predominantlyorange.com. You think about preseason and think about like the aftermath following a game is that we get the all 22 tape, Sayre, and it allows us to go back and watch the tape and I think maybe address some areas that we have concerns about. And obviously there's a few that we're going to talk about here on today's episode of the show. I think we should really kick things off with the biggest concern that I think Broncos fans really have and some concerns that we have. And that is the pass protection, some protection stuff. And then maybe the offensive line in general right now is really going to come under focus before that regular season matchup against the Raiders.
Absolutely. The offensive line definitely seemed to let everybody down in that preseason game, right? Especially on first watch when you're hoping that the passing game can get something going. You want to see Russell Wilson really rebound from what we saw last year. And we talked about this in plenty of shows leading up to the preseason, that an offensive line, good or bad, can really help or hurt your evaluation process in the preseason, because it's not just the first stringers, but the second and third. Like if they're not able to protect the quarterback or push in the running game, you're not going to be able to get a good look at those guys that you got out there trying to fight for roster spots. And certainly applies to the starting offense. And we've had how many complaints, at least since I've joined this show, Cody, about the offensive line and the issues therein. They have been aplenty. There's no doubt about it. The offensive line has been bad for the Broncos, and it's been battered as well. It hasn't just been poor performance. It's been injuries, guys shuffling in and out of the lineup, no stability at right tackle, having to just constantly alternate guys in and out. We thought this starting five, though, this new starting five, we thought they were going to kind of be dominant from the beginning. They've been getting a lot of positive hype the offseason. ESPN calling them a top 10 offensive line unit. People saying they could be the best guard duo in the league with Ben Powers and Quinn Miners. Ironically, the one guy who played quite well, Lloyd Cushenberry, he was the one guy that everybody all offseason was saying the team really needed to replace. So it's kind of funny how things work, but certainly when you watch this game at first or second glance, I think the offensive line has quite a bit of work to do leading up to this San Francisco matchup.
Yeah, they do. And look, based on watching the all 22, we could talk about Garett Bolles. I do think right now, right? I think we can chalk up maybe how his performance looked due to rust. This was his first game back since suffering a major broken leg. There's some things that still has to come with that. You know, his kick step, his stance, how he moves. But more importantly, I also think that there was a variable that you should be expecting at some point, maybe not in the preseason, but it is something you're going to see common in the regular season. The Broncos faced a lot of different pressure looks from the Arizona Cardinals, and we're talking a lot of cover zero, which for us, you and I talked about it in our post-game report, just seems a little unorthodox to see that many cover zero attempts thrown at somebody in a preseason game. Maybe it's because, hey, Russell Wilson was playing. I'm not sure what it is here, but I think a lot of the issues, going back and watching the film, there's some times where some guys got out-physicaled or out-finessed. And then there's also, I think, some miscommunication errors, right? And this is something you and I have talked about as well here on the show. Communication errors across the board last year were so common because Denver was rotating in a new offensive lineman every single week at seemingly a new spot. Now, keep in mind, no Mike McGlinchey here in this game. You had Isaiah Prince, who had a really good week of practice, looked good in his reps. And unfortunately, in this game, he had a couple of plays where he looked nice, but for the most part, protection-wise, definitely had some things stand out. They're like, hey, that can't be something that happens in the regular season. Same thing here with Garett Bolles. I think it's a little too early right now to worry about Bolles. Right now, let me preface this by saying what we saw on Friday, yeah, unacceptable. You can't have that happen here. First game back, all circumstances considering surrounding Garett Bolles, I think we have to keep in mind. However, if this does persist, Sayre, will be a massive issue here for the Broncos. And I think Russell Wilson, considering the fact that he had so much pressure in his face often at times when he was in, I thought Russ actually did a pretty good job on the evening. Yeah, he had that one miss where he threw it up to Cortland Sutton on a third down play where he had a cover zero blitz coming when he could have hit Dulcich or Judy. These are things you're going to go back on. But did you notice that the Jerry Judy touchdown play was the same exact play design by Sean Payton that it was on that play? So it allowed Wilson to go back and correct something. This is exactly what the preseason is for. But yeah, pass protection has to be way better. Communication has to be way better. And that's one thing I think we absolutely have to hammer home in one of our keys looking forward to this week's game against the 49ers.
It absolutely is. And I did notice that it was the same play, Cody, thanks to our boy Tim Jenkins. I watched his breakdown of Russ's performance. Really good stuff from Tim, and looking forward to more of that. But the question that I have, and I know you say it's too early, and I agree with you, it's way too early, especially given Bolles coming off a season-ending injury. He's been getting that off-day treatment every so often in training camp. I can't help but wonder, though, why did Cam Fleming take an incentive-laden contract? I was talking to our good friend Zahn about this earlier in the offseason, Cody, and he brought up a really great point. Just the fact that Cam Fleming took visits to Miami, a visit to Jacksonville, and he ultimately took an incentive-laden deal from the Denver Broncos, which a player of his veteran status, are you really going to take that unless you feel like you have a really good shot at playing? A very interesting little breadcrumb to just kind of toss out there, and maybe we'll come back to that at some point. I do feel like there could be a shorter leash on Garett Bolles this season. If Sean Payton watched last year's film and said, hey, he really struggled last year in the games that he did play, we need to get a guy like Cam Fleming in here. Because I also think it was fascinating that Isaiah Prince started the game at right tackle, right? I mean, if you feel like if there's any shot that Mike McGlinchey's not playing week one with his injury that he's dealing with right now, well, you put Cam Fleming out there, get him those reps, right? I don't know. I'm fascinated by the whole situation here, Cody. Not trying to be, I don't even have the tinfoil hat right now, not trying to be a conspiracy theorist, but I think it's something to pay attention to as we progress through the preseason. And hopefully Bolles has a great game against San Francisco and we don't even have to really talk about it again. But I guess we at this point, we have to kind of just wait and see.
Yeah, you have to wait and see. But you make a great point. Like, when you look at the tea leaves, there are little sprinklings in there, right? Because Garrett, essentially, this could be his last year with the Denver Broncos. And a lot of it will be contingent upon, does he show improvement, considering some of the stuff, the rumors that came out about the trade block in the offseason. It would be foolish to just overlook it and say, okay, hey, there's nothing to read here. You have to keep an eye on it at least. And our goal for Garrett, in terms of maybe even his goal for himself, he even acknowledged in his post-game presser in the locker room that, there's some rust there. Knock that rust off a little bit. It's going to take some time, but ultimately by the time week one comes around, you need him to be where he should be, because you're going to have Tyree Wilson, you're going to have Max Crosby, you're going to have other guys, Chandler Jones off the edge, and you have to be able to take care of business against some of those defensive forces that Denver will face this upcoming season. Broncos Country, let us know in the YouTube comments down below or on social media at Cody Roark NFL, at Sayre Bedinger, at Locked On Broncos. Your thoughts on the offensive line, the issues that we saw there. If you've had a chance to go back and rewatch the game, you understand the game. What did you come away with that? Let us know your thoughts on what we discussed here on today's show. But we're also going to talk about some other areas of concern. Should the Broncos be concerned about backup quarterback ahead of this season? We'll dive deeper to that on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. This episode of the show is brought to you by our friends over there, Underdog Fantasy. August is here, and you know what that means. It's the official start of fantasy football drafting month. Combined with preseason play ahead of the regular season, fantasy football is massive around this time of the year. It all starts with your drafting process. Get championship ready for your home league by trying out Best Ball on Underdog Fantasy. All you do is one live snake draft, no waivers, no trades. Underdog sets your best lineup every single week. Try it out with Underdog's Best Ball Mania Tournament. It's the largest fantasy football contest of all time, and it's back, and it's even bigger with $15 million of total prizes that are up for grabs, including an absurd $3 million going to whoever wins it. Last year, the winner drafted their team in July, so don't wait around. Get in on the action here today with Underdog Fantasy. Visit underdogfantasy.com or find them in the App Store and sign up with promo code Locked On to get your first deposit doubled up to $100. That's Underdog Fantasy, promo code Locked On.
Well, there's certainly worse things to be worried about after a preseason game than the backup quarterback, but we got to talk about it. Is Jarrett Stidham? I mean, what's the situation with him? We saw a really poor performance in preseason week 1 out of the Broncos' new backup quarterback, the highly paid backup quarterback, and we're going to discuss that and more here on this episode of Locked On Broncos. But before we do that, we got to say a huge shout out, a huge thank you to every single one of you that subscribes to the podcast wherever and however you listen on all platforms, or if you watch us on YouTube and you're subscribed to the YouTube channel. Mile high salute to every single one of you that makes Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. Cody and I absolutely love and are thrilled and privileged to be able to do what we do. And we love getting to engage with you in the comments, on Twitter, wherever and however we get to hear from you. It's just awesome for us. And I love it that you take us with you to the driving range, on the treadmill, while you're working out, in your car, wherever you're at listening. Huge shout out to all of you. And thank you so much for being part of this together with us. And Cody, we got to ask the question about Jarrett Stidham after, 5 of 15 completions and attempts there. It was not a good performance from him. He threw an interception, just not clean whatsoever. You would think a guy like him, who's getting highly paid, coming in, Sean Payton talking about him as a potential future starter in this league, even some hot takes out there this offseason, like maybe he's a threat to Russell Wilson. I know some guys over there at NBC Sports kind of made it seem like that could be the case. Chris Sims put him as the 32nd best QB in the NFL. I don't think we saw that on Friday night whatsoever. And I don't think we saw even a guy who's worth 2 years, $10 million out there. I would have much rather drafted a guy. I would have much rather gone after a Sam Darnold, something like that. But here we are, Cody, and now we have to kind of evaluate what's been. I know you've seen Jarrett Stidham out there every day at training camp. We all saw him on Friday. Were you surprised at all by the on-field performance there Friday night against Arizona?
I was a little surprised, yeah, but I'd say maybe the areas of his game where I wasn't surprised is I think that throughout camp, there's been some moments, some stints of hesitancy from Stidham in terms of getting the ball out, and whether it's due to good coverage or whether it's, oh, this is my first read, shoot, it's not there. Where do I go? I think there's been a little bit of hesitancy on his part that we've seen in some of the practices, especially last week. And that kind of carried over into the game, which definitely is a little concerning here. We didn't get to really hear too much from Sean Payton in his post-game press conference, which it's a little bit different than the practice pressers we get from him. Practice pressers, he's a little more open. Post-game, it's short, sweet, to the point. He wants to get out of there. He wants to go talk to his guys a little bit more, and also meet with the coaches here. Now, for Stidham, I definitely think that, hey, it's not the showing you wanted to have there, because on his interception, the ball came out a little late on that comeback route that he had thrown there. So timing, hesitancy, some inconsistency. Yeah, 5 of 15, Sayre, is not what you envision from a guy who's expected to come in and maybe be your backup in the event that Russell Wilson were to go down with an injury here. To me, I have questions, right? And obviously you want to see a bounce back this week from him against San Francisco, but I think maybe one of the storylines we should watch this week here pertaining to backup quarterback, if Stidham comes out here in week 2 against the 49ers and struggles in the preseason, and DiNucci is still chomping at his heels, is there a legitimate conversation to be had between us and I think between the Broncos and even the fan base? Is Ben DiNucci going to be the backup quarterback here behind Russell Wilson? You mentioned a great point about the contract and what you got. I mean, it's crazy to see Stidham step into a game last year and do what he did, but you also have to keep in mind he's throwing to guys like Devontae Adams, guys like Darren Waller, Hunter Renfrow. Like, he had Josh Jacobs. I mean, he had a lot of good pieces around him, and he did make some really good throws. So where's his struggles coming from? Is it mental? Is it processing? Is it physical? Or is it just not yet trusting the scheme, not yet fully into it yet? I think these can be maybe a combination of the factors impacting him, but do you think it's a little too early, in your opinion, to say, okay, hey, maybe Denver's backup quarterback isn't on the roster, or maybe it is Ben DiNucci over Stidham, or do you think it should play out a little bit longer?
I think we have to kind of say we got to let it play out a little bit longer, right? I think that's the only thing right now, and we need to let it play out all across the league as well. There's ideas that I have out there, Cody. I don't know if like for example, for instance, I don't know if Carolina's keeping Matt Corral after drafting Bryce Young and signing Andy Dalton. If Matt Corral becomes available in a trade and they're like, hey, we'll take a day 3 pick off your hands for the guy. Are you doing something like that? So there's ideas that I have in my brain that I would be interested in for the upside purposes. But you know me, I'm always about going after guys with upside, even if they've been, NFL draft busts or if they are still early on in their years in the NFL, what have you. But I think we've got to let it play out just a little bit more to try to unearth that guy that we saw last year for the Raiders against the 49ers. And that's exactly, I think, one of the biggest reasons why the Broncos did sign Jarrett Stidham is that potential that he showed. And yeah, he had some good games when he was a backup with the Patriots and showed some stuff in the preseason. I remember seeing a number of highlights anyway. So let's see how he does against San Francisco again, right? Maybe that's the mojo to get him going, right? Week 2 of the preseason here, playing against the 49ers, obviously very different team, but you want to see him bounce back, just like a hitter in baseball going through a slump or something like that, or has a bad game, a pitcher has a bad game, right? You want to put that guy back out there and make sure they can find a way out of the slump. And luckily for Stidham, he's not ending the preseason on this sour note. He started on one. How do you finish now? How are you going to finish? Are you going to give people confidence? Because, yeah, Russell, he missed time last year. He missed a couple games, and Brett Rippon had to play. If Jarrett Stidham is in a similar situation, we need to know based on what we see in the preseason that, okay, yeah, this guy, he is a $10 million quarterback that we signed in free agency. We're getting that guy. If Russ goes down, we're getting a quality backup that can actually maybe even start a couple of games if need be, give you that confidence to maybe let Russ heal. Let's say it's a 1 or 2 week injury, and Stidham's got to be a guy to keep the ship going. He's got to keep things afloat. We thought when the Broncos brought him in, we thought, man, this guy, he's going to be able to come in, operate the offense, throw the ball with accuracy, kind of had a little sneaky athleticism that we saw against the 49ers last year. And we need to see more of that. We need to see him make better decisions with the ball, and we need to see him look like a starting caliber quarterback.
I think that's a fair point, and the way that you put it as well. Here's my hunch on it as well, right? It's a new system for him entirely versus what he learned with Josh McDaniels last year. And on top of that, too, there were some things, some other factors that impacted Sim's performance. For example, there were some penalties, some holding penalties. They had a little bit of a longer field distance to work with in certain situations there. There was some pressure there by the Cardinals. Some of the same issues that impacted the Broncos starters, though the Broncos starters on offense, luckily, knock on wood, didn't have the issues with penalties. So that was a great sign to see here for them. Yeah, have to give him more time there. And after week 2, I think our outlook will be a little bit more, I'd say, have a sample size, have more to kind of run off of here when we talk about this next week and maybe looking at some of the things too. Obviously, the Broncos are back at practice this week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday before being on the road on Friday, and then preseason game on Saturday. That'll be at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Thank you for that one. It gives us a little bit more leeway in our post-game report here. But aside from that, Sayre, there are some other areas of concern that we're going to talk about on today's episode of Locked On Broncos, including a concern about the Broncos defensive line and the depth that it has right now. We'll dive deeper to that on today's episode of the show. This episode of the show is brought to you by our friends over there, FanDuel Sportsbook. Football season is about to kick off, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to win all season long. Because right now, when you bet on a Super Bowl winner, you can get bonus bets every time they win in the regular season. Just pick any team to win the Super Bowl, and you'll get bonus bets for every victory that they have during the regular season. You can use your bonus bets on spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. Jerry Jeudy's over-under touchdown receptions for this upcoming season is at 4.5. Based on what we've seen and the building momentum that he's had behind him, Sarah, I think I'm going to take the over on that. Broncos head coach Sean Payton has the third best odds to win Coach of the Year, right in front of New York Jets coach Robert Saleh. So check it out over there, FanDuel Sportsbook. So visit FanDuel.com/lockdown and start earning bonus bets with America's #1 sportsbook. That's FanDuel.com/lockdown. Is the Broncos defensive line depth a little bit of a concern after DJ Jones' injury this past week against the Arizona Cardinals in preseason action week 1? Thank you so much, Broncos Country, for tuning in, making us your first listen of the day every single day. You can get us wherever you get your podcasts, where you can watch us every single day on YouTube. Make sure if you're watching on YouTube, you comment on the video, you hit that like button, you interact with other people in Broncos Country for the algorithm. We appreciate you so much taking time out of your day to make us part of your day here. Sayre, let's dive into this conversation here about the Broncos defensive line depth, because DJ Jones left Friday's game with a concussion, which is unfortunate. And obviously he's going to go through concussion protocol, which means we more than likely will not see him much at practice this week. Doubt we see him play in the preseason game against the 49ers here. And it begs the question here, because the depth as is already tested. Mike Purcell not yet back from the NFI list. How concerned are you about the Broncos defensive line depth overall with now the loss of DJ Jones?
I'm very, very concerned, Cody. I think we talked about this before, that I would have personally liked to have seen the Broncos bring more players in before this went down during the game. And I know they brought in Shelby Harris for a visit, and that was great. But hey, he signed in Cleveland, right? I mean, you didn't get him. You didn't offer him enough, or didn't offer him the role that he wants. And maybe the team is scouting the defensive line way differently than me, Cody. We're putting faith in Jonathan Harris, right? Putting faith that he's going to be able to produce. We haven't seen him play for a large enough sample size at all to be able to say definitively, like, oh yeah, it's a good projection right there. We just don't know that. The team would know better than I would, though. I mean, you got trusting their judgment there, but even a performance from a guy like we saw Elijah Garcia, right? He had the 2 sacks in the game, almost had a third. Even that to me is a flash right now. It's just a flash of something. It could end up being something, but as of right now, it's just a flash, and it's nothing that we can even definitively say after one preseason game. Like, I feel really good about, numbers 3, 4, and 5 on the Broncos defensive line right now, much less 6, 7, 8. Like, there's been years where I've wondered, how are the Broncos going to get away with only keeping 6 defensive linemen, right? Because they've had so many good ones. They've had some really good defensive lines recently. And as of right now, I can't even put together a group of 6. I just released a roster prediction on Predominantly Orange on Sunday, and I had trouble picking even 5 guys. I included Mike Purcell, projecting him off the NFI at some point here soon, but I had trouble even picking 5 guys off the list right now. And that's with DJ Jones, who had a concussion. So the Broncos got to do something here. I don't know what it is. I don't know if they feel the same way, but to me, Cody, the depth on the defensive line, and even without DJ Jones, even the starting group on the defensive line, major concern to me.
Yeah, it is. And I will give a little bit of a shout out here to Tyler Lancaster. I think he's actually had a pretty solid training camp. He's obviously playing the nose tackle position, wearing number 96. If you noticed, that wasn't Inyoma Uwazurike playing. That was Tyler Lancaster, who spent some time with the Raiders last year in the preseason before suffering a season-ending injury and missing all of last year there. Jordan Jackson, I thought, actually had some solid reps in the preseason game on Friday. But right now, you look at it, I agree with you. I think there's question marks surrounding depth on the defensive line and maybe impact, right? Not to say that these guys can't step in and maybe produce at a high level. Right now, it's just an unknown, right? And going into the regular season, you never want to have any unknowns about positions, right? You want to be solid. You want to be sold on it. And there could be a point, as you mentioned, as you were building out your roster for the regular season here, there could be a point where Denver does look at maybe making a trade. We've seen in Sean Payton, George Payton's histories, they have made some preseason trades before to acquire a player, or they snag somebody off of the waiver wire once roster cutdowns happen from 90 to 53. You're going to get a little bit more of an expansive reach to be able to put in claims for guys, because versus it being after every game where you go from like 90 to 85 and then from 85 the next week to 70, there's more cuts happening at once, which gives it, makes it difficult for teams across the entire NFL to put all these claims in on all these different players. I think it opens things up a little bit, gives you opportunities there. But yeah, you want to see a little bit more. If Elijah Garcia comes in this week against the 49ers, does the same exact thing, to me, that's trending upwards. It's like, all right, hey, 2 weeks in a row, he's shown this high motor. You want to see a little bit more out of PJ Mustipher as well, the undrafted rookie free agent. And even want to see something out of Haggai, Chisholm, and Dubuisi, maybe getting some more run here. And what can he do? But yeah, right now, the inexperience factor on the defensive line, really outside of Zach Allen, Jonathan Harris has more experience than most guys there. And obviously now with DJ Jones set to miss some time with the concussion. Yeah, I'm with you. I'm a little anxious about the depth there overall. Now, if you had to choose, let's say you were George Payton, Sean Payton, would you do a preseason trade, or would you wait for roster cuts to potentially happen? And there's also some free agents still available right now.
I might get a little more aggressive on the trade market. If there's somebody available out there for, let's say, a third round pick or later, somebody who you feel could actually come in and start for you, I have to look at the free agent defensive lineman, Cody. I know Shelby Harris was an intriguing option, but I know he wasn't the only option. I know guys like Hakeem Hicks still out there. I just don't know how effective some of these older veterans can be going forward. But I think I would get a little aggressive in a trade. Even the Broncos being fifth in the waiver claim order. Remember, I know the Broncos haven't had a first round pick the last couple of years, but they do have high waiver priority, being one of the worst teams in the league. So there are some benefits, at least for now. Roster cut down is the time to be utilizing that top 5 waiver priority, right? So I'd definitely be looking for guys there. The only thing is can you bank on that? Because if a good player hits waivers, I mean, they're typically getting scooped up by the teams that have priorities 1, 2, or 3 in the order. So you'd have to still get a little lucky, even picking as high as 5th in the waiver order, to be able to get guys that are effective there. It's not impossible, but it's certainly beneficial for you to go after guys that you want. So if a team gives an inclination or shops a guy around that they may otherwise be cutting, why would you not throw a late round pick or do a pick swap like George Payton does for a guy? I mean, those types of things, you barely even notice them in the end because you're still at least swapping picks. So to me, Cody, I would get a little more aggressive on the trade market if I was George Payton and Sean Payton, and I would see what's out there. Unfortunately, I mean, it's just, as of right now, it's just so hard to know which guys could be available. And that's when some of these big kind of surprising, shocking types of deals, they can go down. So maybe that's where the Broncos are headed.
Well, the draft picks, Sarah. There's the conversation there because I still think that's a thing. Everyone gets so caught up in draft picks, but we've seen 7th-round draft picks turn into something valuable for Denver that they either acquired or swapped with teams like the Detroit Lions a few years ago. I think that George Payton, Sean Payton collaboratively know what they're going to do. I'm just curious to see what they will do and how they maybe counteract some of these concerns. Are they as concerned as maybe we are? I mean, I would love to be a fly on the wall when they have these conversations after games or in their meeting rooms throughout the week, but unfortunately, we don't get privy to those conversations here. But Broncos country, the Broncos back at practice on Monday, the Centura Health Training Center. There's practice Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and more. We'll have you covered every single day with the biggest takeaway, the biggest storyline. I'll be at practice this week, and we'll follow up here on the Locked On Broncos podcast. So make sure, if you have not done so already, you subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Sayre Bedinger and myself will be back tomorrow for a brand new episode of the show.